Hello Metroid fans, one and all. This video is a discussion on which emotion spectrum lantern ring Dark Samus would be best qualified for. So without further ado, let us begin. While the previous Lantern video analyzed Samus's character, this video analyzes the character of Dark Samus. Unlike her namesake, Dark Samus's character is not as complicated, yet at the same time Dark Samus's character is shrouded in about the same amount of mystery since, like her namesake, she doesn't talk. Of course, being a Phaso-Samus-Zometroid doesn't exactly warrant the ability to talk. If you didn't watch the previous Lantern video, and if you are unfamiliar with all the different Lantern cores and the emotions that fuel each one, I will go ahead and re-summarize all of the Lantern cores. Rage and hatred fuel red, avarice and greed fuel orange, fear fuels yellow, willpower fuels green, hope fuels blue, compassion fuels indigo, and love fuels violet. Just like in the previous Lantern video, I will exclude the white and black Lantern cores from the analysis. If I didn't, however, Dark Samus might have qualifications for a black Lantern ring. Anyway, at a glance, Dark Samus is most definitely not qualified for any of the good Lantern cores, except for the Green Lantern, which still has a little room for evil, since it is all about the will, and sometimes the will is not necessarily used to fight evil. But regardless, Dark Samus has shown strong willpower, particularly in her strong will to live. Even after defeat, Dark Samus's strong will prevails and preserves her essence. Her will is so strong, in fact, her spirit remains intact even when her particles are literally separated from each other. She even manages to escape Dark Ether in this particled form, right before it collapses. Only in Metroid Prime 3 Corruption does it end up failing her in the end. The only problem with her receiving a Green Lantern ring is that the Green Lantern Corps are fighters of evil, and Dark Samus would definitely misuse her power and be exiled from the Corps, perhaps even destroyed. Now, other than willpower, let's take a look at Red. Dark Samus has certainly had her share of displaying rage and hatred, particularly in her defeats. Just look at this. In those moments, she reminds me of Atrocitus or some other Red Lantern. Other than these obvious displays of rage, Dark Samus also has more silent displays of hatred, such as at her first encounter with Samus. But there are even further, more subtle displays of rage and hatred that make Dark Samus's character, well, darker. By Metroid Prime 3 Corruption, the gamer becomes familiar with a deeper level of sadism in Dark Samus's character. And no, I'm not referring to the psychiatric type of sadism. Although it is not explicitly said, to my knowledge anyway, it is implied Dark Samus is responsible for the corruption of each of the three hunters. The moment Samus defeats each of the three hunters, namely Rundus, Gore, and Gandrada, Dark Samus appears in this winged apparition form, finishes the hunters off, and sucks the Phazon right out of them. Gore and Gandrada's defeats, however, show something further, which is the fact that Dark Samus is able to absorb the Phazon out of another even if the victim is still alive.
You have failed me.
Further, when Dark Samus appears the moment Gore is defeated, it is clear that Samus is absolutely powerless to stop her. This means that Dark Samus could actually suck the Phazon out of Samus and probably kill her in that way if she wanted to. But she doesn't, and this to me shows just how evil Dark Samus actually is. Dark Samus wants Samus dead, yes, but it is evident that Dark Samus also wants Samus to feel pain before she dies. A being of pure Phazon, Dark Samus knows the cruel nature of Phazon more than anyone or anything else. The very Phazon Dark Samus embeds in Samus's body tortures Samus physically throughout Prime 3, and Dark Samus sees to it that Phazon tortures Samus emotionally as well by first corrupting the other hunters, among whom was the fellow that saved her life, and then killing them before her very eyes while she is utterly powerless to stop her. This is the wrath of Dark Samus, her hateful, cold-blooded revenge. While Dark Samus is qualified for the Red Lantern ring, she is also qualified for the Orange Lantern ring. Gollum is to the Ring of Power, as Scrooge is to Profit, as Dark Samus is to Phazon. She practically breathes the stuff, and no wonder, she's made of Phazon. In a sense, this adds to her qualifications for the Red Lantern Corps, since the Red Lanterns use their own blood as a weapon, and Dark Samus's blood is pretty much Phazon. But I digress. Essentially, every encounter you have with Dark Samus, she is feasting on or has just recently been feasting on Phazon. In fact, the final fight in Prime 2 shows just how much of an appetite for Phazon Dark Samus has, as she has consumed enough to deteriorate herself. Further, Space Pirate logs show that Dark Samus raids their bases from time to time in order to obtain more Phazon, and you just so happen to run into such an instance yourself right before the duel with Dark Samus in the Sanctuary Fortress. The moment she vanquishes the pirates, she immediately leaps for the Phazon and absorbs it. The next displays of greed are, of course, in the instance where Dark Samus absorbs the Phazon right out of the hunters as she kills them in Prime 3. There is also, of course, the time Dark Samus decides to just bathe in the core of Phase itself before the final fight in Prime 3. Good golly. While Dark Samus demonstrates her readiness to kill all those who refuse to hand over Phazon to her, she still seems to withhold her lust for it strategically, as it is all part of the plan. Of course, the moment Dark Samus would receive an orange ring, that would certainly change. Dark Samus also behaves like an Orange Lantern in the sense that she can replicate herself, similar to how an Orange Lantern can create light constructs of himself or herself. Last of the qualified is naturally Yellow, the Ring of Fear. Samus is virtually fearless, or at least one of the most courageous heroines of video game history, so the reality Dark Samus actually frightens Samus is thus a considerable feat. The fact that Dark Samus just won't die already, the fact that she seems both omniscient and omnipresent at times, and the fact she has some abilities that even Samus herself cannot match are all rather terrifying attributes. She is also mysterious, and no one likes what they don't understand. If it wasn't clear that Samus is terrified of Dark Samus at the end of Prime 2, then it should be clear at the very beginning of Prime 3, as Samus is rudely awakened by a nightmare of Dark Samus returning. Also, Samus isn't the only one Dark Samus frightens, as Space Pirate logs reveal by their depictions of Dark Samus as a tyrannical, iron-fisted leader. However, while the Yellow Ring of Fear looks for those who instill fear in others, it also looks for those who have great fear within themselves. When we look at Dark Samus, we encounter far more situations in which she instills fear in others rather than she herself being afraid. Yet, there are about 2 different instances in Prime 3 that suggest she is, in fact, afraid. The first of which is while all the Space Pirate forces orbiting Phase are defending against the Federation invasion, where is Dark Samus? Oh yeah, she's hanging out in the very heart of the planet. Of course, this is probably not out of fear, but strategy. By this point, she is rather familiar with Samus and is able to predict her next move to a certain extent. The moment she and the Space Pirates lose contact with the Leviathan battleship, she knows it must have been Samus herself who took it over. She then predicts that Samus will try to obliterate Phase itself as she obliterated Dark Ether. So Dark Samus orders all her forces to lie in wait for the Federation while she fuels herself for what she may realize is her final duel with Samus. She is the only one that can defeat Samus, but just as a safeguard, she has the Aurora Unit 313 to aid her should she lose. Speaking of which, this is the second possible display of fear on Dark Samus's part, yet this too could be out of strategy and not cowardice per se. Dark Samus realizes the very Phazon she injected into Samus has enabled Samus to get the better of her. So, instead of death, Dark Samus chooses to merge with the Aurora unit and try one last time to defeat Samus. However, even then the very mark of the beast Dark Samus embedded in her namesake would prove to be her very bane. This being the case, Dark Samus seems to lack some critical qualification for being a Yellow Lantern, and that is, of course, the fact that she is seemingly not all that scared. While these other moves appear to be acts of cowardice on her part, Dark Samus is still mostly a fear instiller rather than a frightened individual. And thus, our top candidates for Dark Samus are Red and Orange. To be honest, I don't see how either one of these is more prominent than the other. While there are more instances where Dark Samus demonstrates greed, the instances where Dark Samus demonstrates rage and hatred are so intense they make up for the frequency difference. That being the case, since there have been instances where an individual wore more than one ring, I would say Dark Samus would be chosen for both a red and orange ring. Like what was mentioned earlier, Dark Samus behaves like a Red Lantern already to a certain degree since her very life source, Phazon, essentially her blood, is her primary weapon. The irony is, of course, the fact a Phazon overload is her weakness. That shows the ultimate consequence of greed. Dark Samus might not have been so vulnerable to any sort of Phazon overload had she not consumed so much of it. Yeah, ironic. Long story short, Dark Samus is a Red-Orange Lantern hybrid. So that's my analysis of Dark Samus and the emotion spectrum rings. What do you think? Did you agree with my conclusion? Thanks for watching. Don't forget to leave a like and or a comment and subscribe. See you next mission.
With blood and rage of crimson red, this power is mine, this is my light. Ripped from a corpse so freshly dead, be it in bright day or black night. Together with our hellish hate, I will paint all that falls within my sight. Will burn you all, that is your fate. To take what I want, that is my